Hello and welcome to the Mighty Oaks Show. My name is Jeremy Stolniker. I am the Executive Director of the Mighty Oaks Foundation. And I am here today remotely with Chad and Kathy Robichaux. Chad and Kathy, of course, founded the Mighty Oaks Foundation, and they are at their home studio in Arizona. But we want to talk today for just a few minutes with both of them, and then we'll talk to Kathy specifically to understand the Mighty Oaks story. Our story is a story that now involves really thousands of folks over a number of years, and so many stories we could tell, and we do that periodically through this show, and we're thankful for the opportunity to do that. But we know that if we kind of dial it back, that all of those stories had a first story. And the first story of the Mighty Oaks Foundation is the story of God's work in Chad and Kathy's life and in their family. And really from that is where Mighty Oaks was birthed from or came from. And I know a lot of folks know the Mighty Oaks story and are familiar with at least aspects of the Mighty Oaks story, but not everyone has heard it. And so I want to do a couple of things. First, Chad, if you can give us a recap, kind of the big picture version of Mighty Oaks and kind of what led to the point where you had a conversion and you had this moment of understanding the direction that you needed to go and took your family. And then we'll come back. And Kathy, really, I think what we'd like to hear from you is specifically beyond the story, your perspective as a wife, as a mom, as someone that really went through this. And, Chad, I think jokingly, but also seriously says he's the first student of the Mighty Oaks Foundation. And really, it was your prayer and perseverance and those things that led to even being able to have the programs that we have. So, Chad, start us off by just telling us the story, how we got to the point, or the foundation got to the point where it would be birthed and started, and then we'll get into some kind of broader aspects of that.
Yeah, like you say, just keeping it brief. When for those who know my family, we are a third-generation Marine Corps family. So my father, I got to witness growing up. Sadly, my father struggled his entire life with the things he experienced as a Marine in Vietnam. And then, years later, I joined the Marine Corps at 17 years old. And, after many years in the Marine Corps, I had the opportunity to finally deploy and did my 8 deployments to Afghanistan and suffered with many of those same things. I was diagnosed with PTSD and experienced some of the shame of failure and all these different things that I was facing, and tried pretty much everything to pull myself out of that. I'd been through the counseling. I had been through the diagnosis, been given prescription medication. I had been to different programs, network. I even had some, engage in my professional martial arts career where I was a professional fighter and had success there. And so we had, success with it. Some people would think success in money or notoriety or different things to keep you busy might snap you out of that. I tried all these things and nothing had worked until the restoration of my faith. And the restoration of my faith in a relationship with Christ began really in those darkest moments with Kathy, standing in a gap and fighting for me. When Kathy and I first separated, if anybody's heard me speak before, I'll always talk about this moment because it was such a contrast in where me and Kathy were. And when we separated, I was kind of trying to move away from, the responsibility of my family and feeling like I could break free from having to deal with Kathy because she didn't understand me and what I've experienced or been through. And Kathy had a different reaction. She went to a church, probably not to have God restore our marriage, but she went to that church for the right support and people would be around her. And in those moments, she began to pray for me. And of course, and I've said it many times, of course, I'd ask her, what did you pray for me in this time when I was betraying my family and kind of neglecting the responsibility as a husband and father? She said she would pray, God, let me see Chad the way you see Chad. Let me forgive Chad the way you forgave Chad. Let me love Chad the way you love Chad. And so all those moments that she would spend in prayer for me, I'm sure a lot of women are out there praying for their spouses, and maybe the other way, maybe husbands praying for their spouses. I believe I'm a living testimony to the power of a praying wife who prayed for me when I had completely given up. That led to those prayers led to really her finding me in a place where I was going to take my own life. And in an argument we got into, she asked me a question that changed my life, where She asked me how I could do the things that I did in my military career, my athletic career, and when it came to my family, that I would quit. And cornered by that question, I decided to make a change. That change had nothing to do with God. It was me wanting to just fix the pieces that I had broken in our life and try to repair the damage, which led me to meeting a man named Steve Toth, who stepped into my life to mentor me. And so one, I had Kathy praying for me, and two, I had this man step into my life as a mentor. And that mentor, Steve, basically he pointed out to me that I had tried everything else. Nothing worked. And it was time for me to give Christ a chance. And I did. And when I did, my life was radically changed. I found restoration in mine and Kathy's marriage, in my own family, in the brokenness of my own life. I found hope again for the first time. And I found ultimately what I believe, I sought for my whole life, and that was purpose. And that purpose was manifested in the sharing of what I had discovered and Kathy had discovered in our own healing, that Christ was the solution to our brokenness, that it was Christ did have a plan and purpose for our life still, and we had to choose to step into that. And I've said it many times before, and I just don't know how to explain it any other way. For us, it was like if we were dying of cancer, and this guy Steve introduced us to the cure to that cancer, and that cure was a relationship with Christ. And so Mighty Oaks began by us simply wanting to pay that forward, to share what we discovered with others. And it sounds like, I think for many people who have heard me speak, I hear it a lot of times, people say it sounds like a fairy tale story. It couldn't have been that easy. And the truth is, it wasn't that easy. When I made the decision to do that, to get back in that fight, to turn things around, and ultimately to want to share it with others, I had to face the damage that I had caused over many, many years. A wife that I had hurt, trust that was broken, pain in the life of my children, and the willingness to right those wrongs was not an easy one. And ultimately, the hard work it took to do that, and it's still work that we do every day because it's our past and our history. The work to put that back together, I believe, was us being obedient to what we felt God had called us to be as a couple, and ultimately to the work that God called us to do through Mighty Oaks. And so the other side of that story lies in Kathy, who was the wife that was willing to fight for me when I had given up, and ultimately the grace that she showed me to have the restoration in our family, and ultimately trust me again to lead our family into this crazy journey called Mighty Oaks. Yep. And share it with others.
So I've got several questions. A bunch of things jumped up in my mind when you were talking. Let me start kind of in a different spot. Maybe we've obviously talked about this quite a bit, and I know your story really well. But let me ask you to talk about something I haven't asked you to talk about before, and that's the ongoing journey. Yeah. I think that people sometimes believe that they'll get past something like what you guys experienced, and they'll have this change where they come around a corner, and that's it. So the decision was made, the fights were fought, everyone kissed and made up, and now everything's great. Can you talk about that for a minute? And here's why I'm asking you to do that. I think it's very important for people to understand that the best of marriages every day require a decision, again, to be committed, to be faithful. But most marriages have trouble. Most marriages have, difficulties and, kids and life and all those things. You don't make a decision once and that's it, right?
No.
That's right.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it began, what began as those changes that I had to make in my own life. And for Kathy, I expected, this woman was praying for me. Like she wanted this certain type of husband. And now I'm trying to be that type of husband. I'm like, I made the change. I'm an answer to your prayer. And obviously.
I'm the answer to your prayer. Yeah, that's great. I've said it to my wife a few times.
I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. And I'm going to be exactly what you're praying for. Well, I mean, that didn't go so well when Kathy, because now she's terrified that I'm going to let her down. And, how long is this going to last? And so I actually, when me and Kathy first moved back in together, I felt like it was almost immediately that I was met with rejection. It really confused me at first, because I'm like, I made all these decisions. I surrendered my life to Christ. I feel like I feel like a fire was lit inside of me to fix these things in my marriage. And now you're throwing things back in my face again. You don't trust me. You're mad all the time. You don't even want me around you. And I'm like, what is going on here? Like, did I just get set up for failure? Did she just want me to come home to be drugged through this the rest of my life? And that's where I think the mentorship of Steve really played an important role, because I was able to go to him with those things. And Steve was able to ask me those tough questions. Well, how many times, he would say, how many times did you tell her you're going to change before and you didn't? And I was like, well, a lot. And if she's hurt, okay, she's hurt and she's mad. Does she have a right to be hurt? Does she have reasons to be mad? Does she not trust you? Like, does she have a reason not to trust you? Have you done some things that show you're not trustworthy? And I was having to answer all those things. And Steve told me something very important that played out, I think ultimately was the key to playing out to us, to playing into us be able to successfully navigate this. And that was him telling me that, hey, you're going to have to make a decision. If you're going to allow your wife to be hurt, if you're going to allow your wife to heal, if you're going to allow your wife to go through this. And I made a decision that, however long it took, I was going to allow her to do those things. And just that making a decision, I think deciding in advance that I was going to allow her to be hurt, I was going to allow her to throw things back in my face, I was going to allow her not to trust me, making a decision in advance. It didn't make it easy, but it certainly took the shock out of it. It took the pride out of it. Like, I knew in advance, like when she was hurt, when she'd throw things back at me, I'd already expected it. And so it was a lot easier to navigate. And so through the years, to answer your question, through the years, those things got a lot. That first year particularly, those moments still existed, but they got further and further and further and further apart. Now today, all these years later, almost 10 years later, those things, we have not turned a corner, and those things are just gone in the past. Those things are further apart. And but there are times that I'll say something, I'll do something, I'll have a behavior, and Kathy's like, goes right back to having those insecurities and insecure feelings. And sometimes because it's further apart, it'll shock me now. And I have to remind myself how to deal with it. Right. And but they're a lot further apart. But there are times, and sometimes it's not even anything that I'll do in the work that we do. We'll be working with another couple, and we'll see some guy make stupid decision, like a stupid decision that I made in the past, and it brings her right back to me, her visualizing me in that same scenario. And so I didn't do anything wrong. I'm like totally innocent here, but,
yes, you did.
But I have to endure that. But I have to understand, instead of defending myself and say, hey, I didn't do anything wrong, why are you mad at me? Like, right. Instead of me doing that, it's having the compassion and grace that I've learned from her to give back to her and say, man, I'm really sorry it brings you back to that time. I know that was 10 years ago that we initially got through this, and maybe it was 12 years ago that this happened in our own life, but I'm sorry you're going through that, and I'm sorry you're feeling that way, and just showing her some grace and compassion, and not defending myself and creating an argument over it.
Just this past week, we actually had somebody say to us, I heard Chad speak. I heard him give this testimony. Obviously, you kind of hear everything in a 45-minute speech of Chad's, but it's not like he has the time or everybody wants to hear everything that we've gone through. We showed that there was some dirty things. It was ugly, but how God restored it. And so she's like, there's a whole missing piece. And yeah, there's a missing piece, but that's not the time or day for it. But she says, I know in that missing piece is a long story and a lot of pain there. And yes, there is, but I've even had other women say, kind of hear this story and then they see what they see right. in videos and podcasts and whatever they see this outcome that looks really good, but they don't know that if we go back to the separation, how much easier it probably would have been to continue the way we were going, separated, go into the divorce. probably would have been a lot easier of a process to go with that divorce than it was for us to actually come back together and then walk forward in forgiveness and learning how to trust, and him learning how to allow me to express anger and bitterness and sometimes hatefulness. And those were hard. So those are the things I think that people, especially women that have gone through what I've gone through, like, oh, well, that's great for you. That's good that you have a fairy tale ending, but that's not where I'm at. Well, that's not where I was at either. It's just that we made the choice to move forward. When we decided to get back together, we might have fell 5 times, took a step, fell 10 times, but we kept going.
Yeah, I think both of us would, like in both of our scenarios, I mean, it's hard for us to say, but it's just the truth. It would have been easier for us. It would have been easier for me not to maybe start a new relationship with a new woman, a clean slate, even if I became a Christian, not to have to deal with someone I hurt and wounded and hurt, and not have to deal with the history of and the lack of trust and all those things. It would have been much easier. But, I mean, easier isn't always the best thing.
So that's a point. And since you guys teed it up, you guys have to answer the question now. If it would have been easier, then why didn't you do it? And if you knew it was easier, why would you counsel other people not to do it? Because in marriage counseling, this is the question, right? It'd be easier. There'd be more peace at home. The kids would be happier. We could move on. It'd be easier. So, okay, knowing that, even looking back on your own situation and knowing that, why would you not counsel someone else to do that?
For me personally, I think it's because maybe in the worldview and in the secular eyes, that's what we would see. That's easier. But it was the my foundation in Christ and where he was, what he was placing on my heart and moving forward. That's what gave me just enough peace to allow myself to, okay, I'm going to go through this fire, because I knew it now. I knew I wasn't alone going through this. I knew that with the help of Christ giving me and helping me in my next steps, in my next direction, that this would be something that I can possibly change in my future. I can change the outcome with my husband. Because in reality, if I would have went the divorce way, I was also feeling that I didn't want to walk any further in this bitterness anymore. Because if you heard me say in some of my past stories, I came from a divorced home. And my parents hated each other. And my mother's even gone today, and my father still has a hatred towards her. And because we were developing such strife between each other, and my kids were still hearing everything, even though Chad was away from me and she choosing to move on, he was making sure I wasn't moving on. He had this control over me. And if I did something he didn't like that I was doing, he made it known in front of the kids, yelling at me, rageful moments at me right in front of the kids. And I knew I just didn't want to go that route. So for me, I think I walked forward, and I just have to be able to forgive. I have to learn how to walk in forgiveness.
I think for you, a lot of it's out of obedience, right?
It was definitely out of obedience to Christ. So I think I just grasped onto that more than anything. It wasn't anything of this world. There's nothing I can explain other than just trusting in the Lord at that time, that he was giving me enough peace to move forward. Now, going through it, I definitely wondered if that was really where he wanted me to be, day after day, that I couldn't get the past and these thoughts out of my head. But obviously now it's even easier to say, obviously that's where he wanted us, because look what we're being able to do today. What do you think?
Well, I think observing Kathy, for Kathy, it was complete. I don't think it had anything to do with her liking me or wanting to be around me. I think it was complete obedience, just my observation of her.
That's true. That's good.
For me,
Mhm.
for me, I think there was a moment of reality to where I realized, you know, that she was worth it, that our family was worth it, even though it was going to be hard. I think I just realized that I don't think I had the maturity yet, spiritual maturity yet, for it to be obedience towards Christ. I knew it was the right thing. Like inherently, I knew that it was a hard thing. It would be the hard work. I knew it was going to be hard work, but I knew it was the right thing. And I think beyond that, I looked at Kathy, I looked at my kids, and I said, "This is going to be hard, but they're worth it. They're worth it." And you know, I don't think I think that was probably been one of the reasons that I was willing to take my life, is because the realization that I was going to live life without them wasn't something that I wanted or desired. You know, I didn't want it. And so I was willing to take my life, not to knowing that I wouldn't get to be with them. And so if I'm not going to kill myself, then this is who I want to be with. I know it's going to be hard, but she's worth it. My kids are worth it, and it's going to be hard work, but it's the right thing to do, and I'm going to do the hard work.
There were some scary times, though. I remember at least 2 or 3 times in the first 6 months that Chad, you picked up your keys or something like that, that I just knew that he wasn't going to be able to hang in there. And thankfully that prior to us splitting up, I probably wouldn't have tried to go run after him because I was so done. I was so fed up. But those 2 or 3 times that I can't do this. You're impossible. You're not accepting what I'm doing. Thankfully, I was able to come after him and try and show him at least that I was willing to continue to keep trying.
Yeah. I just think it's so important for people to understand that people that are close to our story as an example, and it just how difficult that first year was. I think we even tell it to guys when they graduate our program. Like, I mean, the final challenge that you usually give, and a lot of our leadership at the program give, is when you go home from a program like Mighty Oaks, or when you make a decision like I did in my life to step into the lives that we were created to live, and we're excited about it, and on fire, and we're in this mountaintop moment. We have to realize that before that mountaintop, there was a valley, and in that valley, we hurt people, we created a lot of damage in people's lives, and those things, just because we have those moments in our life, those things don't go away. We have to go back and face those things. And if you really want to recalibrate your life into this life that God created us to live, there's going to be damage control that has to be done, and it's not easy. It's difficult, but it's worth it.
Kathy, what was your before you separated, before a lot of the things that are kind of the catalyst for the separation and so forth? What was your relationship with God like before kind of all of this went down? Did you have an active faith? Was it?
I would say that my faith was active. So I really would say that I became a Christian. I gave my life to the Lord at the age of 11. Growing up in a home that did not have a faith or go to church, I didn't really have somebody to lead me and guide me. There were times I would find rides to churches just to find a place for me to get connected. That was really hard as a young 11, 12, 13-year-old going into my teens. When I married Chad, him and I both, he shared he was a Christian. I thought I was a Christian. And so we would go to Christian church and do things, do things like that. But as I grew older and continued to develop a desire to have a relationship with Christ, I would try to lead my family to church, and Chad would come to church with me. But as the kids got older, it got a little bit harder for me to want to get my kids to come to church. They kind of saw that if dad didn't want to come, or if dad didn't really desire it, then they kind of didn't really have that desire either. So it was really hard as the mom to try and lead my family down that path. And so speed up, that's kind of how it was over the years. But as we were getting closer to this separation, because I didn't have a lot of friends, that kind of is a whole other story of mine and Chad's. There was a lot of insecurity he had with me having friends outside of his community. I really felt alone. I didn't have anybody to talk to. So it was a desire to be connected in a church again. So I started actually going to Woods Edge a little bit before Chad and I separated. Mm-hmm. And so thankfully I had that church already there for me when Chad and I separated. So truthfully, now I had full access. I don't know how to say that. I was going to church finally. Not that attendance mattered. It was my heart. So I was there on Sundays. I was showing up on Wednesday nights just because I wanted to be spiritually fed, and I needed these true godly people that I would meet there, the ones that came alongside me and praying for me and praying for my marriage and my husband. I needed that community in my life. And once I established that, I knew that this was something I never wanted to be without again, or that I couldn't be without, especially in these hardest times that I was going through. So yes, I was a believer way prior to all of this happening. I desired and longed to have him in my life and in my heart every day of my life. But when we were separated, that was the first time I completely surrendered and put the burdens of my heart in my life at the foot of the cross, and really truly truly recognized how to develop a true relationship with Christ. And not only is he just somebody I believed in that was had died and rose again, but I had developed this relationship with him for the first time that I don't think I really ever experienced with him. It might sound weird. I don't even know how to explain it, but I felt as almost as his arms were wrapped around me during those hardest times when nobody else was there.
Yep. Would, without the element of faith in your life, without that growing relationship and a church community and those people in your life, without the presence of God in your life, would you have been able to get through these issues in your marriage without that? Or would you say that, if there's a key, that's the key? I don't put words in your mouth, but
yeah, no.
When you say that,
I get very similar questions. How did you do it? It's like I tell people about the faith side of it.
Yeah. What's the formula? I want to know. Yeah.
Yeah, and so some people are like, okay, can I do it with that? Is there another way? No. So because I didn't have a family in my life, I didn't have anybody that had really before I met these group of God-loving people in my church, I didn't have anybody like that in my life. So who would have been there to encourage me? If I didn't even have them while Chad and I were going through before we separated. It was I just met them at the separation. So I didn't have nobody telling me how to work through these difficult times, how to love my husband through these difficult times. So I have no clue how it would have even been possible to find success in this broken marriage without people that come alongside you that have grace for this person that's hurt me, but willing to show me how to pray for him, how to love him, and how to stand up in these times that I was too weak to even stand up. So I personally think there would have been no way I've said in the past, my mother had already died before the separation, but in the past, when I had experienced difficulties in my marriage and I would share with my mother, she had been married and divorced 3 times. So her advice to me was to pack my stuff and leave. And then I had Hunter, and I'd share with her the difficult times. Pack your stuff, get Hunter, and leave. You know, that was her way of dealing with marriage when you're not happy and when the other person isn't doing something right. So no, not for me.
Yeah. What would you, so you used to come to our programs back in the early days when we were figuring out the classes as we were going.
Yeah.
And I was teaching the truth about PTSD on a dry erase board.
Yes.
Back in those days, you would come Thursday or Friday of the program, and you talk to the men who were there. That's when we only had a men's program. You talk for 30 minutes or 35 minutes and kind of give, you know, from your wives, I want to represent all of your wives, and there are a few things I'd really like for you to know. You don't have to retell that whole class, but what are some things that husbands don't know or don't understand that from your perspective they really need to understand?
Well, like the men do share on the last day, basically what you left at home is what you're returning back to. So Chad, who was gone, now returning home, he's made this new decision that he's going to make everything work. He's
Answer to prayer.
Yeah, answer to prayer. So he's going to walk in and everything's going to be great. So I would share with these gentlemen that no, everything isn't going to be great. Now, I have met or have heard of some amazing wives that handle their husbands pretty well when they come back home and they're thankful. But that's a very small percentage of women. Most of us are kind of like, oh, that's nice. You had a great weekend. You went horseback riding. You got to go, what's the
Zip lining.
Zip lining. You got to go zip lining. And you just had such a great time. Well, I've been home cooking and cleaning and feeding kids and changing diapers, and you just get to play. So that's just a little summarization of that. But the thing is no, these women, you're coming back home to somebody that is hurting, somebody that is scared to death of you lifting her up just to throw her back down. If she gives you that little bit of trust again, she just knows that you're just going to come back and just slam her right back into the ground. She doesn't see much hope in your change of heart. We need to see you actually making those steps. And those steps might take you 6 months. It might take you a year, 2 years. But we need to see that. So when Chad decided to make those changes and he would allow me to freak out and express such horrible hurt, instead of like he was in the past, I told you, I was sorry, get over it. He would put his arm around me and he would tell me how much he loves me. And he would tell me, I'm so sorry I hurt you. And at first I was like, so who is this? Like, this, Chad doesn't do this. And he truly decided to make that change of how he was going to respond. And thank God for Steve Toth sharing with him and Chad being able and willing to listen to Steve, telling him how to really give me some mercy in these areas. There were nights that I would wake up with his hand on me praying. And there were times that I couldn't even accept him praying for me. I just remember just kind of being on my side, having his hand on my back, praying for me, and I would just feel it. And I would just cry because I was crying out of confusion. I was crying out of many different emotions, but I couldn't believe yet what he was doing. I had to take double takes quite often. And so eventually though, 6 months, 7 months, 8 months goes by, and he kept showing me this. time after time. And yes, if he did fall, when he did fall, it was how he turned around and got back up. And it wasn't the same Chad. It wasn't I might as well just leave because I just screwed it up again. You don't accept this anyways. I'm out of here. No, it was the consistency of over and over making those choices that he wasn't going to give up, that he was going to put the same effort that he was giving to everything else. Like I asked him, how can you do everything you've done, but when it comes to our family, you quit? I needed him to put that effort into me, which was our family, which was all of us, and moving forward. And he did.
So on the other side of that, what would you tell a wife who was in the same situation as you, but, early days, when there's very little hope? What do you say to encourage someone to stay in there for as long as it takes?
Yeah. Yep. So in the early days, when it was just anger, madness, and confusion and just misunderstanding between us, in those days, I didn't know what this whole post-traumatic stress thing was. I mean, Chad, I say this often, he was a jerk before he was diagnosed with PTSD. Okay? But I guess it was just okay. It was a little magnified. But I didn't get connected, and I didn't have that family, that community of women who can encourage me during these hard times, or somebody I can just express myself to. Like now, thankfully, I have so many women in Mighty Oaks. Mighty Oaks is my family. And man, when I'm going through sometimes, especially I'll go to Susanna and a few of the other women in our organization to just get my head back on straight. So I think for those women that are in these stages of just their marriages falling apart, getting connected with like-minded women, hopefully in their church community, to get them some guidance and how to be a compassionate wife during this time. I didn't reach out for that. And again, mainly because I didn't have friends and I didn't have community that could guide me in that direction. But I wish that I could go back. So that's usually where I tell these women to start. Now, I don't have an answer yet how to really deal with when the husband is not faithful in the marriage, because it's not like I don't want to lead women into, oh, you just need to leave him because he's not going to stop that. He's going to put you through, drag you through the dirt. It's going to be a long time of hell. Truly inside, that's what I feel like. That emotion wants to come up quite often. But I don't believe that in divorce because of adultery. Yes, that is a means of divorce in the Bible, but I believe that forgiveness can take place. And so I believe in that setting, hopefully a husband and a wife can both make the decision to get wise counsel and move forward from there. There's many steps to that. But if the husband is unwilling, and if the husband is continuing walking in an unfaithful marriage, that is something that I would say would be something to talk about with your pastor, and get some guidance.
Unrepentant sin. Right?
Yeah, that would be unrepentant sin. And so a lot of women think, but if I'm a Christian, I guess I just need to sit here and be a doormat and let my husband just continue to commit adultery. No, you don't need to be a doormat, and no, that's not okay for him to continue to commit adultery. But steps, it is okay. See, I felt crazy. It made me feel crazy when Chad was going through that. he made me feel wrong if I wanted to address the issue and move forward on that, whether that meant getting help or I'm not allowing this, enough is enough. If putting down boundaries, you can't have me and eat your cake too. The decisions have to be made. You do not need to be a doormat.
Would you say, and I can't speak for women everywhere because I'm not a woman, but the natural response is an emotional one. You want to respond emotionally. And so to have someone like a pastor, a counselor, a group of Christian friends that have your best interest in mind, not just friends who say, like your mom did, pack your stuff and get out of there, but people who understand God's plan and understand the Bible, having those people counsel you, it removes kind of that emotional response so that you can make a God-honoring response to what you're dealing with.
That is really true, actually, Jeremy. The way you say that, it just brings back memories of how I once used to respond and to how I respond now. Just because
take everything directly to me.
Yeah, exactly.
And now she takes it to other people before me.
Yep. And usually when I take it to other people, like Susanna, before I bring it to Chad, most of the time it just dissolves, or we laugh about it or something. And I'm so thankful for that, because that caused a lot of strife between us in the past when poor Chad could be just innocent. And I would just bring something up, and to this day, it's still like that. I really have to be really intentional about how I approach him with my own insecurities.
I'd say, that same question you said for the women understand how to deal with the men. If I could speak a little bit into that, what Kathy did that was pretty profound in our restoration was, prior to us making these changes in our life, Kathy used to, I just felt like she was constantly trying to mold and change me into being this perfect husband that she wanted. And so I had such a pushback and such a resistance to that change that it just created just constant tension. And when Kathy had made a decision to stop trying to fix me as like a pet project and start focusing on herself, just aligning her own life with the life that being the woman that God created her to be. When she started focusing on that, then ultimately her doing that, her becoming this woman, it prompted a desire for me to change myself without her forcing it. And so they began instead of it being forced to me, it became this desire inside of me to change, to be a better husband for her. Mm-hmm. And
a lot of times, that first. Yeah. So a lot of times in marriage counseling, people will say, well, I'll do that if they will, or I would do that, but I can't because they won't. But really what you just said, I mean, that's kind of the key, right? Is you can't control your spouse, but you can be right before God. So when you're focused on yourself and focused on doing what God wants you to do, that releases the other person then to also decide to either follow God or not. And there's a lot of power in that.
Yeah, and I find myself doing that now too, when I know I'm right, which is most of the time.
That's because you're God's answer to the marriage. So
yeah, I mean, but there were times that, I know I'm right in this, and I have that and I just know that I have to make focus on myself and not trying to fix her or correct her. And it's hard for me to do because I'm super prideful and very competitive in every aspect of my life. And so it's very hard for me to do. It requires discipline to, take my emotion out of that situation and just, focus on, I think we teach in our program, even if you're not 100% responsible for something, if you're 10% responsible, then you own 100% of that 10%. And so usually I'm only 10%. Still joking. But I own 100% of that 10%. And if I'm 90%, I'm going to own 100% of that 90%. Yeah. And, it's just something I think we've learned to do. And I witnessed Kathy do it still. And, I try to do it the best I can.
But I would say that took a lot of practice for us.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I think we definitely failed at that many times, but we've come a long way. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So when Mighty Oak started, we started as essentially as a men's program. We were serving veterans and then the active duty community, but men, we had a men's program. it's been 4 or 5 years now since we have had a women's program. And a lot of people ask about the women's program and what it is and what it isn't. It's probably a little more broad even than our men's program. We have veterans, active duty service members, and then spouses. Spouses are allowed in our men's program as well, but math, there are more female spouses than male spouses of service members. So that's the mix, and it's a very interesting mix in our program. And more and more, we've tried to provide resources outside of those week-long programs. Just more people need help than we can possibly get to. That's why we do the YouTube show. That's why we podcast. That's why we have the radio show on Mojo. That's why we do a lot of the writing and a lot of the other things we do. And recently, one of the resources that, very recently, Kathy, you have started to put out for women, for wives, is your blog. And so we're almost 10 years removed from, your transition as a family and the beginning of Mighty Oaks. And now 10 years later, you've decided to start a blog. Why now? And what would be your goal? What are you trying to accomplish through that?
Well, truthfully, I think God's been kind of really trying to give me this task for a while. And I think I've been trying to ditch it because it's not an easy thing for me to do. I'm not a huge writer, but
she writes every day.
I mean, yes, that's it. Prayer writing, just kind of talking to God is really what my writing is. I actually just put a blog out yesterday, I think, on that about journaling. But so with that being said, that nudge that I feel like God's been giving me, I'd been praying about it, and it was really interesting because I had just wrote this prayer down again. And I think that same day that I wrote that down, like, what is it, God? Why do I keep feeling, what am I supposed to do? I keep getting all these women reaching out to me. How am I supposed to respond? Because my story, usually I get the, how did you do it? And that how did you do it isn't just a one email and snap, you're fixed, and that's how you move forward. And so as I wrote that day, I got like 7 messages that same day. And I was like, okay, I think it's time.
Right.
And so, so that's why I figured if maybe I can't respond to every single person reaching out to me individually. And you guys understand that too. We get messages from men all the time, and I've been able, I have many women part of the Mighty Oaks women's program that have been able to help, and I can direct these women to these women that are reaching out for help. I can direct them to others in our program. But people were still looking for answers from me. And inside I'm like, God, I don't have the answers. I just have a story. And I have a story of how you worked in my life as I walked in forgiveness. And so that's when I decided, okay, I reached out to Michael, because Michael has the skills of putting together a blog, and he had it. And I was like, okay, he had it like so quick, and he had it ready to go. And I'm thinking, man, I guess I really have to do this. This guy just spent a lot of time in putting this together. And so they just kept moving forward. So I'm like, okay, I'm ready. So I don't know how it's going to look for the next, upcoming months, but I'm just trusting if God put this on my heart and has asked me to do it, that he's going to guide me and lead me in this.
Yeah, that's awesome.
For 10 years now, I've observed Kathy every morning wake up and do her, it's very convicting for me because she wakes up every morning, she does a Bible study and she journals. And I'm like, I've been on her for quite some time to share it with other people. And I'm super proud of her to watch her do it.
And you came up with a really catchy title for your blog. It's KathyRobichaux.com. So it's really hard to find, except that most people can't spell Robichaux. So throw an X in there and you'll figure it out. But okay, last question for both of you is this. We could talk all day and we'll probably do this again. But talk about hope. What does hope mean to you, and where do we find hope? Chad, you can start, and then we'll end with Kathy.
I mean, hope is to me is it's the realization that God has a plan and purpose for our lives. I think, when I found myself in the most hopeless points in my life, is because I felt that there was no future, and there was no chance of the future. There was no any possibility of any future ahead was dark, and it wasn't something I wanted to be a part of. And so the understanding and realization, Jeremiah 29:11, for I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you, not to harm you, plans to give you hope in the future. The realization of that scripture and that truth being a reality in my life, not just words on a page, but a reality in my life. To know that God has a plan for our life, He has a future for us, and it's a good one. And it means being obedient to Him, being in the marriage that He blessed me to be a part of, and the family that He's allowed me to be a part of, the work that He's called us to do. Just the realization of those things are blessings and truths that God has put in my life. That's hope for me, and I get to live it out every day, even in the bad days, and I have a lot of bad days. Even in the bad days, I'm able to look beyond that bad day and say, man, that's a great future ahead.
Yep.
I think mine's pretty simple. Hope gives me a reason to fight. I really think that without that hope, I wouldn't have thought that it was even possible to have the relationship we have now. Trusting God that He loves our marriage, and that His plan for our marriage was obviously better for our marriage. So just putting that hope in Christ alone gave me that reason to fight. And even now, for every trial that I experience, I look for the hope in all of it.
That's awesome. Well, thank you guys. I'm sure we'll do this again, but go back to doing whatever it is you do in Arizona. I'm not even sure what people in Arizona do, but I guess shoot guns and walk around in the dirt or whatever.
Go catch some, what are those little lizardy looking things out there? I thought when we lived in Louisiana, that was the worst of bugs and rodents. But there are some nasty things here.
And rattlesnakes and scorpions.
Oh. The difference is in Arizona, you don't eat them. And in Louisiana,
exactly.
Louisiana, we'd be frying those things up and throw it in a po' boy.
Yeah.
Oh, boy. All right. Well, thank you. And I'm sure we'll do this again. For those of you watching, if you have not yet subscribed to our channel, you need to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and that will let you know when new episodes come online. For those of you that may be listening to the podcast or listening to the radio broadcast of this episode, jump over to YouTube, and there you can subscribe to our channel. And we put all kinds of content there, a lot of very helpful content, not just our show. But subscribe there, and then again, hit the notification bell so you know when things come online. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.